Focus on the partners that are engaged with you. And that doesn't mean that you're the only partner on their line card, but you do need to be one that they're paying attention to and that you're supporting in a way that's mutually beneficial.
I'm Ed Marsh, host of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. The essence of this show is really to try to pull together many threads of middle market industrial revenue growth. And that takes us across a wide range of topics from board engagement and strategy to marketing, deep into sales and technology and customer success. In the industrial space, many of those are managed indirectly through channel partners. And there's been kind of an evolution. There was a lot of channel activity maybe 30 years ago. The internet kind of changed that. There was less, and now it seems like it's coming back more. And so today we're going to dig into channel with Vaughn Mordecai. Vaughn is the Chief Revenue Officer at Mindmatrix. He's a partner ecosystems guru. I got that. I said that without stumbling on it. Hands-on experience.
Or laughing at me.
Yeah. Well, the laughter's coming in a minute when I ask you about it. But hands-on experience in all things partnerships. He jokes that he's a recovering market research leader, and he lives in the Southwest where he's able to pursue his love of outdoor adventure. So settle in, buckle up, like and share this episode, hit the bell, you know the drill, and please join Vaughn and me as you think deeply as we have this dive into channel. So welcome, Vaughn.
Hey, thanks. I'm glad to be here, Ed. Really looking forward to the conversation.
I enjoy our conversations. We talk periodically, and they're always thought-provoking. But to your point a minute ago, I got to start with ecosystem guru. For those of us that aren't in the tech space, what in the world does that mean?
Yeah, it's ecosystem is really interesting because in the channel, it used to be that one organization would have, a handful of partners, and one company could support, 5 or 6 partners, and those partners would work with the original company, whether it's industrial or technology or CPG or anything else. But that relationship was one to few or one person kind of managing a handful. Well, the thing that's changed, and this goes actually back to a concept that kind of emerged in the 90s, but they're starting to see businesses that are acting like natural ecosystems, that things are codependent on each other, that people are building things that require more than one company involved. There might be multiple partners in the mix. You've got alliance partners that are equals that are building things out. And as a result of that, instead of this one to few or one to many relationship, now you've got many to many relationships that look like an actual ecosystem, only they're going on in the business space.
So we still have reps and agents and distributors, and we still have indirect sales channel. We have partnerships, we have alliances, but it sounds like what you're saying is underlying it all is now looking at it from the perspective of the buyer. How do we put it together in a way that makes sense for the buyer as opposed to our selfish kind of small piece interest of it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, when you start to look at it, and particularly when you talk about channel's really just a route to market. And every company has channel. They've got multiple routes to market. It's basic. In some cases, it just might be a direct route to market. So it's their direct channel. That's not technically what everyone talks about when they're talking about channel. But when you really look at the definition of what that is, that's sort of, it's an example of it. But when you get to where we're at today, these multiple channels are starting to interact with each other to just service the client. It used to be that the vendor was in charge, or the manufacturing organization was in charge, or whomever was supplying the product was in charge of that motion. And what's happening is that it's turning. The consumer is in charge of what they're actually looking for. The result of that is that they're searching for more things digitally, And as a result of servicing digitally, the partner becomes the one that has to deal with all of this stuff. And so the partner gets to a point where they're in charge with the customer, as opposed to the original vendor or manufacturing organization that used to be in charge. They're now on the other end of that spectrum.
And obviously that creates lots of opportunity for channel conflict that we'll talk about, but you've got channel conflict within companies. I mean, you may have e-commerce and direct salespeople. You've got channel conflict outside of companies with maybe you have MRO vendors that sell some of your stuff. You've got channel partners. So that's a fascinating piece of it that we'll talk about some more. You've ended it up at this point after a long career. You've done project management, you've done alliances, you've done a ton of research stuff. You sat as for a stint as the board chair of the Marketing Research Association. Talk us through, the 3-minute version of your career, and what's the thread that ties all these things together?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I found myself in leadership, executive leadership roles fairly early in my career, and what that did was it gave me access to sort of instead of the tactical stuff, I started dealing a lot more with the strategic stuff that kind of sat over the top. And for a while, I ran a research company for several years. The shelf life of the president of an organization, eventually you've added what you could, and they've gotten out of you what they could, and so I reached a point where it was time to kind of move on. I was the subject matter expert for the organization. I was very good at research. I'd been doing it for 20 years. And when I started looking around, I basically stumbled into the channel. Okay. I was hired on with an organization to head up the consulting and intelligence part of their business, right? The research part of their business. And it was aimed at technology companies, which I was very familiar with and comfortable with. I'd done that type of research. And when I got in, I started trying to understand what they were about, and they were about channel. And that I was sort of baptized by fire into all of that, because I started engaging with the top technology companies on the planet. I was trying to help them understand how they should improve their partner programs, how they should focus on their ideal partner profiles, how they should organize and orchestrate their data, and did that for several years, and really came to love this thing we call channel or partnerships, and eventually took over as the CRO of that organization, and now I'm with Mindmatrix, which is a PRM and a partner marketing automation platform, as their CRO. And it's been fun. I think I'm almost I'm pretty serious about actually just finishing out my career in this partnership space, because I enjoy it so much.
So does the research tie in with the channel, or you just ran into channel because of the research work that you were doing that touched on channel?
It's both. I ran into the research bit because I was in research. But the thing that's quite interesting about that, and frankly, I think that there's a gap in the industry right now around this, and it goes past technology and into channel and partnerships and all of these other things. But in the consumer space, or the B2C space, they have customer experience measurement that they do all of the time. And they've got employee experience measurement that they do all of the time.
Right.
But there's a gap in terms of understanding how the customer experience in a B2B world is being impacted by the partner experience. So there's a real need to do partner experience research and understanding how that sort of predicts the customer experience. And you've got, some of the organizations, I mean, Cisco is an example of this, that use the partner experience as part of their tiering within their partner programs. But that was the connective glue between the two things. I started doing a bunch of partner experience research and was quite good at it due to my previous life measuring the customer experience and employee experience.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm located near Boston, so I look at the world tending to think of tech space as being northeast and northwest. But obviously, the Southwest has a vibrant, kind of a vibrant cluster that's growing. As you know, there's Atlanta, there's also Indy, there's Austin. Your company's based in Pittsburgh. Do you find, with all your background in tech, is there a difference in culture between those different tech centers, or are they all just same flavor, basically?
Yeah, I mean, there it's very interesting when you look at the Eastern tech companies versus the ones that sort of grew up in the Palo Alto area and in the western side of the U.S. I talk about being a Westerner at heart, and there's just a different pace. I mean, they still work and they still work a lot, just like you'd expect, but the approach to it is a little bit more around balance as opposed to just putting in your hours. And it's interesting. I mean, I used to travel to the east a lot in these consulting engagements to try to meet with some of our enterprise clients and stuff out there. And when you'd go into those organizations, some of the cultural elements that you would see in the West Coast companies were quite a bit different, actually.
And you guys are based in Pittsburgh. Is that a hybrid between the two, or which is it closer to?
It's funny on our organization. I think we're a bit of an enigma. We're not we're not publicly held. We're a private entity that has been bootstrapped, and because there's no PE money in it, we're not governed by the same requirements, and we're not governed by the sort of the outcomes and the predictability of outcomes, and how does this PE company flip the company to the next company. And
Right.
and as a result of that, our CEO and founder has said, there are three things that matter and maybe a fourth, and the three are that the customers really like what we're doing, enjoy the platform, and that are that they're getting a good experience with us. That the employees enjoy working for the organization, is sort of the next one. That the platform stays on top of the changes in the industry is kind of the third one. And you'll notice that none of those are actually revenue related. The fourth one is probably that we have projects to work on that continue to support those other three initiatives. And as a result of that, there's a real focus on kicking and putting things back towards the industry that contributes. So we do things like giveaway partner marketing automation training. We've got a free certification program that's really uncommon in our space, basically.
Talking about finding projects and growing business, obviously that requires marketing and sales, different combinations, different formulas depending on the industry and circumstances. Which do you consider yourself fundamentally? Are you marketing or are you sales?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I've always been a sales guy. It's funny, but I've told a lot of people if I had to do it all over again, I think I probably would have gone the marketing route rather than the sales route. But maybe it's just that they can't shut me up.
Well, you can make a lot more money at sales.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. But yeah, as a CRO, I've got folks in all of those aspects kind of reporting into me. Our own partner program reports into me, and we've got our sales and marketing and business development. And so for me, it's a nice cross section of everything that I'm interested in, which is sort of the perfect place for me.
Got it.
But I got here through sales. Let's be quite clear about that.
I understand.
Yeah.
There's a lot of terms around channel. Some of them mean the same thing. Some kind of have different meanings. Companies use them differently. Let's just try to quickly level set with a little bit of language. Sales channel, indirect sales channel, partnerships, alliances. We already talked about ecosystems, reps, agents, resellers, nearbound. Is there a way you can kind of quickly help us understand what each of those mean and how they fit together?
Yeah, fundamentally, I mean, I think there are probably four overarching terms. You've got direct versus indirect, right? Your direct is your sales team that goes and they solicit work from clients directly. And then you've got indirect that is leveraging the channel or partnerships to generate sales indirectly through another organization. So that's what they're talking about when they talk about direct and indirect. Now, within that indirect motion, you hear the words partners and channels thrown around quite a lot. And the partnership folks will always say, well, channels don't exist anymore. Well, they do actually exist. I'm sorry to tell you if you're a purist on the partnership world, but basically channel is a route to market, and partnerships are the people that you actually work with that you have to support and get to know and build relationships with. And you hear about this concept, the channel. Well, the channel is actually just referring to that indirect motion, and it's sort of um, the overarching element of all of that. Now, the thing that we're seeing is that the SaaS companies or the software companies and some of the companies that look like that are latching on to partnerships as the term, whereas the manufacturing organizations, the tech companies like HP or some of those, or even in the industrial manufacturing space, they're referring to channel as opposed to partnerships, and it's because it has to do with how they get their products to market through distribution, basically.
Got it.
Yeah.
There's also obviously a difference. In some cases, the third party holds the paper, and in other cases, they receive some sort of a commission, but the vendor holds the paper. There's also a question of to what degree the channel partner's business is built on services that are related to providing the product as opposed to just selling the product itself, being a conduit to deliver the material versus, yeah, here's the material or the software or the whatever it may be, but we've got an engagement that's, I don't know, 4 or 5 times as big as the price of that. How do you fit those
Yeah,
into those terms?
that's also really interesting, because what you find when you start to dig into that is that there's been an evolution that's kind of occurred over the last 5 or 10 years, basically in this area. You used to have a lot of VARs, and that just sort of referred to value added resellers, and so they were reselling some hardware. And then the software providers came in and said, hey, this concept actually works for us. So then those VARs started reselling software, and you can kind of see, I mean, there are companies that really doubled down on that, folks like Adobe and some different organizations that changed their landscape as a business, and then as a result of that, the VARs had to adapt to it. The thing that has happened since then, and it's really quite interesting, is as it becomes more and more and more digitized, you get this concept of an MSP, which is a managed service provider. Well, why do they do that? The businesses have started to recognize that the real money is actually in supporting the platforms and the software after the deal is done, and that they can typically get 3x or 4x in revenue from the services as opposed to the original hardware sales. So what you end up with is this kind of environment where the vendors or the person that holds the paper ends up having to have programs that reinforce different motions, so you end up with a resale that still exists, or a referral, or selling with, or there are all of these different things now that have kind of emerged, and each one of them has different incentives. But the prevailing view is that if you can round out your business so that you can hang on to that client afterwards, and you don't lose sight of them to the vendor that's holding the paper, that you're going to make far more money out of that relationship.
And the vendor presumably sees in most of those cases that the end user ends up more satisfied and is stickier relationship because of the value that reseller is bringing.
Yeah, and that part of it's been really curious, because originally those vendors have all had services built into their business, and to the point that you're talking about channel conflict, when a partner sells something and then it needs to be serviced, who decides who services that sale?
Right.
And what you've seen is that the services that used to be held by the vendors are actually decreasing as it moves along, and it's increasing as more and more of these providers that are doing the resell or the referral have expanded out on their own services. And so you end up with this difference between partner-led services or vendor-led services. Well, the vendor-led services are decreasing and the partner-led services are increasing.
All right, so let's draw what may be a very stark line. We've been talking primarily about tech up to this point. Now let's talk about industrials. And one of the conversations you and I have frequently that we try to suss out between the two of us is, what are the differences? What are the commonalities? Where is it just a difference of perception of language? Where is there a fundamental difference? How do we need to approach this differently in the industrial space? And I don't know that we've completely figured that out yet, but I think there's certainly a much more traditional mindset in the industrial space about the vendor makes it, the channel partner sells it. It's up to the channel partner to provide local service, local stocking, local availability of aftermarket parts, often consumables. In the industrial space, there's typically consumables that go along with the equipment that the channel partner may be providing as well. Are there kind of would you answer any of these questions differently? Would you describe the channel differently? Are there challenges that you think are particularly important to call out that the industrial space has that maybe the tech space had before that we can learn from?
Yeah, when you look at industrial manufacturing, they've held on to that original model longer than the tech companies were able to. And so, to your point, that one to few or one to many relationship exists far more strongly in the industrial manufacturing space than it does in tech now. What that means is that this idea of an ecosystem, though it's starting to emerge, it hasn't overcome everything else in the everything else in the industry like it did in technology. I mean,
Right.
there's no avoiding it in technology, but in the industrial manufacturing space, it hasn't reached that point. And a large part of that is the sales motion still. You have partners and you have distribution, and there are people that are going to market that way, but the reasons that they do it are different. It's regionally based. You've got these distributions that you have to move something, some part from point A to a distributor at point B that holds on to the inventory, and then when it needs to be released, it gets distributed to the local. But that's all very physical, right? It's physically oriented as opposed to digitally oriented, and so it allows that relationship to hang on in a more traditional way than technology does, that's been forced to digitize a lot faster.
And so, would you say it's fair to characterize the opportunity for channel in the industrial space that can figure out how to foster an ecosystem Are they going to be an oddity, or are they going to be an early mover with a huge advantage?
They'll be both. I mean, the early adopter is always considered to be an oddity. That people don't quite understand why they're doing it. But if you're in a position where your sales motion is increasingly digital, then trying to figure out how to manage that digital flow would put you on the front foot and put you ahead of the competitors in your space that are kind of hanging on to the old school ways of doing things. And it's not that the old school way of doing things is bad. It's just that the way that as the consumer is getting younger and younger, they're saying that they don't really want to interact with the traditional salesperson, and 80% of that buyer journey is happening online before they
Right.
ever talk to anyone. Well, eventually that's going to happen in the manufacturing spaces, just like it is everywhere else. And the person that can adapt to that will be better for it, quite frankly. And then on top of that, they'll start to embrace things that are associated with channel and partnerships, like marketplaces. Marketplaces are a really big thing in tech channel, and they're a really easy application in manufacturing, and they're part of that digital journey. And so you can shorten the process by using those types of um, those sorts of buying behaviors.
So by marketplace, you mean kind of an online referral service that maybe a vendor would have that would offer to their customers or end users a wide variety of resources, complementary products, complementary services, kind of listed in an index that they could reach out to channel partner vendors to access.
Yep, and it also allows them to kind of construct the thing right there on the fly,
Hmm.
right? Like if they know that they're going to need part A from one manufacturer and part B from another manufacturer, another vendor of that manufacturer, then they can start to build out this model of what they need, and the marketplace itself can start to help them through that process, so that they're using best in class connections, so that maybe part A works better with part C than it works with part B, and the marketplace can tell them that.
Right.
And so they end up with better products that they can support, that take less effort, that can drive more revenue, and it's all sort of enabled through this listing. I mean, everyone's purchased on Amazon, and you know exactly what's going on there. They refer you to 5 million different things, like the one that you looked at.
Right.
And it's sort of taking models like that and applying them to the B2B world.
What's really interesting in the space where I spend a lot of time, kind of a subset of industrial manufacturing, often is capital equipment. And so the capital equipment is clearly a physical transaction. This big piece of metal has to get moved from one place to another after it's built. But at the same time, there's stuff that goes along with that. For instance, machine monitoring and remote diagnostic software that
Mm-hmm.
may come from different vendors and be just kind of installed or plugged in on it. And that creates interesting opportunities for channel and also potentially conflicts, as it also gives the vendor the opportunity to circumvent channel to deliver local service. So it's a very dynamic situation.
Yeah, that part is curious because so I've got a buddy who's in the valve industry, right? And it's funny because he's a channel guy in the valve industry. And as a channel guy, when I chat with him about it, he said, "You know what the hardest thing for me to learn is I didn't know anything about valves." And so he's gotten involved with this. Well, why is he involved with it? They're an IoT company. They're Internet of Things, and so those endpoints that he's dealing with are feeding data back to the original cloud,
Right.
basically, and giving them real time access on how well those pipes are moving. Well, when you start looking at that same concept in your explanation, you've got some of the folks in that model that have already embraced it. The IoT providers or technology companies a lot of times, and so they're having to deal with it.
Right.
At the same time, you've got the other ones that are like, "What in the world is this?"
Yeah,
So,
they've got a yard full of plumbing fixtures, valves and pipes and stuff like that, and their world is based on going out and taking physical inventory and having somebody pull up with a truck and load some in the truck.
yeah. When technically the rest of the people around them are dealing with the digital world, right? The
Right.
tracking of how did that pipe get from point A to point B? Did it actually get there? What could have been done to improve the process? Is there, the company that actually delivers that, do they, is there some way we can increase the efficiency of that motion? I mean, my brother-in-law's in he works in UPS, and it's interesting to talk to him about all of the automation that gets wrapped around all of that, and a lot of it is, it's automation combined with resell.
Hmm.
So it's really interesting how often this concept of channel intertwines itself with non-channel world,
Right.
basically. Yeah.
Underlying a discussion of channel is often a fundamental challenge. The best interest of the vendor doesn't necessarily align with the best interest of the customer or the best interest of the channel partner. Is it just a pipe dream that they can ever be aligned? Is it always just a matter of trying to minimize the misalignment, or can they actually really be aligned?
I think there are some good examples in the tech world of where they've aligned themselves extremely well and really managed to do some things that are better together. Uh, I think if you look at let's look at gaming gaming computers, for instance. They have very specific processors, they have very specific hardware built into them, and the the hardware and the software and the chips and everything are well pre-planned. They're solutions that they've realized that we can optimize these in very specific ways to produce the fastest possible gaming computer that without lag and with the best monitors possible, and people are buying into that. And those companies realize that they shouldn't compete with each other in those spaces. um, Intel, for instance, their Intel Inside, it's been a while since they talked about that, but that Intel Inside did a lot of really good things for them, and it was a good example of PC manufacturers being able to make more money on their PCs simply because they had Intel chips in them,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to some other chip. Um, people are you know people are more savvy now than they used to be, but it was only until a few years ago that Apple started manufacturing their own chips and processors to put in their MacBooks. And up till that point, it was almost all Intel
Right.
work. So when you get into the manufacturing world, I think the same thing will apply. And it to begin with, there was a lot more channel conflict, and they still talk about it a lot. In the channel, you still talk about channel conflict quite frequently. But you've got things like deal registration and some stuff like that that helps avoid it. The biggest challenge actually becomes when you start intertwining who gets the services.
Yeah, and multinational locations in the
Hmm.
industrial manufacturing space, you'll often have 7 different plants of the same
Hmm.
company around the country and then more globally. And so then how do you handle that if the relationship is at headquarters, or there is definitely a lot of potential for conflict.
Yeah.
There's different kinds of channel partners. Some just want to collect logos and fill up line cards, and others really may want to build a full business around a single partner. But again, kind of back to the tension, the vendor always wants more mind share, but the partner recognizes that their business could be destroyed. I mean, if they've got too much concentration risk, if there's a change in strategy or ownership or leadership at a vendor, how do you get past this? How do you overcome it so that channel partners will more closely align, dedicate much more of their mind share and their business resources to building that partnership and the mutual objectives, and be confident that they're not going to get the rug pulled out from under them?
Yeah, that one's kind of a funny question. Folks that were too close to resell on Adobe have had kind of an interesting challenge with their partnerships, because sometimes Adobe is really direct in their sales process, and then every once in a while they get someone in there that doubles down on the partnerships, and so they pivot towards the partnership. But if the partner has built their entire business around reselling and supporting Adobe, then it's very difficult for them.
Right.
And and there are others. I mean, Dell's a little bit like that. There are other companies that are like that in the tech space, and I'm sure that there will be in the industrial manufacturing world as well. The thing that we've seen, at least in the tech industry, is that partners typically have about 7 vendors that they support for that exact reason. And there's usually a couple of providers in each thing that they specialize in, so that a pivot on one just diverts what they're doing from that one provider over to the other one that they're working with. And the vendors used to try to get them as one-to-one as they possibly could, but across the board in channel, they're recognizing that you just can't go that route, because the power is now with the partner and the customer, instead of with the vendor, and the vendor's on the other end of the rope at this
Right.
point.
Now, you make the point. In fact, I saw a LinkedIn post from you today that reminded me of how you talk about this, the business proposition versus the value proposition, or something like that. I'm not saying it right,
Hmm.
but feels
Yeah.
like that kind of goes to that same point.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, the concept here is that you might have a really good value proposition, but your business proposition might suck. So you might be able to say, look, I'm going to give you 10% on this resell. Well, the business on the other end says, yeah, it'd be nice to get that 10%, but I can't actually sell your product. So if the motions aren't in place, if the business proposition's not there that enables them to do it from a training standpoint, or from a the commitment to the partner or whomever, right? If it doesn't make sense for their business, then it's not going to matter whether you've got a large incentive or a small incentive, because
Right.
they just can't move the needle on it.
Yeah, and so for instance, the ability to use one product as a entree, a way to gain entrance into target accounts to sell other products, that could be a really important business proposition, right?
Hmm. Yeah. One of the things that when I used to do a lot of consulting, uh, I would, and it wouldn't matter. Again, it's not exclusive to tech. They I would sit down and say, okay, well, what do you do here? And they'd say, oh, well, we provide this product or that product. And I'd say, well, okay, so you want to have a channel, or you want to get into partnerships. Why do you want to do that? And they'd inevitably say, well, so that we can make more money. And that's technically true, but then the next question was, well, why should people use you? And and almost every time they're like, we have the best X product in our market. And my answer to them is, that might be true, but who cares?
Right.
Right. And when you start to look at that entry product that you've just mentioned, the thing I would tell them is, figure out what your value proposition is, what your business proposition is. And then what you want to do is, you want to go in with the biggest vendor you can get the attention of. Because if you can get one of them supporting you, and you can entry with their product, it'll open the door. But if you're just knocking around with other, really small providers, or no one knows who you are, then that entry point is going to be much more difficult.
Yeah, that's a
And
good point.
your original entry point is never going to be the top organization. You might have the best product possible, but if they can't sell it at the scale that they're selling the number 2 product, then they're going to stick to number 2 because that's where all their revenue lives.
Right. You talked earlier about how nuanced the channel can be with multiple versions side by side or overlaying each other. Let's just assume we're kind of talking in a very straightforward way about a single channel, and we want to identify an ideal partner profile. Do you have tips or best practices for creating an IPP or that ideal partner profile?
Yeah, I've spent quite a lot of time in that very specific area, and what they do in there are probably 2 or 3 ways to do this. The first way that folks do it is that they look at their sales out data and they say, well, this client or this partner has a tendency to generate some X amount of revenue, and so we're going to support them. And that's a good starting point. But what you want to do is widen that out and say, okay, well, what characteristics do they have that are actually making them successful?
Mm-hmm.
And you might find that one of the partners is only buying something from you once a year, and it's completely opportunistic. And when you start to throw those folks out and look at the characteristics of the partners that are finding success and finding repeatable success, they have a tendency to start to they start to kind of come together with core characteristics, and that core set of characteristics can be operationalized and they can be uncovered, and most of them actually don't come from your sales out data. It's things like this person, maybe in the manufacturing world, you're manufacturing medical devices. This person's particularly good in the healthcare field, right? And so that one, and then you quickly realize that, oh, not only are they good in healthcare, but they're also supporting things globally, or they're supporting things nationally. And so you're like, okay, well, there's another characteristic that kind of makes them successful, and then you can start looking at those. Now, what they end up doing, and some of the we've actually got this built into our platform, but what a lot of organizations have started to do is that they've built out these models that help identify that IPP, the ideal partner profile, but they build them with the data that the partners have publicly available. So what they end up doing is they'll go in and they'll say, okay, we're going to harvest all of the data off of these partners' websites that talk about everything that they do and who they're working with and all this other stuff, all their LinkedIn characteristics, etc. And we're going to use AI to analyze all of that data, and from there we can actually tell you what are the core characteristics of these companies that are making it versus the ones that are failing.
Hmm.
And then if you've got a big enough database, you can say, okay, well, tell me the next 25
Right.
that look exactly like these other organizations, and at that point you've got this list of manageable partners that are very, very similar, and that you can make an awful lot more money out of, instead of where you started with the sales out data that you might have focused on one revenue generator that only generated revenue once a year.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. Obviously, we've been talking up to this point mostly about these high level business or philosophical questions around channel, but you mentioned the platform. Let's dive in. I mean, there has to be you have to have the tools to actually execute on the strategy and on this high level thinking. So PRM software, partner relationship management, that's what Mindmatrix is.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about the company and about the software category.
Yeah, we've been in the business doing this for about 27 years, and it's evolved over that period. just about any of these providers has sort of a genesis in this space, whether they're particularly good at the relationship side of it, or they're good at the marketing side of it, or they're good at the sales side of it. But eventually they sort of converge. The partner relationship management tools have some core characteristics related to onboarding partners, getting them trained, getting them certified, um, teaching them what they need to know to sell the products, and then providing a content management system so that people can download the right collaterals and the right slicks at the time that they're trying to sell those different products, and then the deal registration tools that kind of wrap around that to minimize the conflict. Now, the larger of the providers, Mindmatrix being one of them, have some additional things kind of bolted onto them. One of which is the partner marketing automation, and what this does is it actually allows partners to market to their client base out of the tool without the vendor being able to actually see the specifics for security and compliance reasons, but they can see the trends and the generality. So they've got an idea of which of the collaterals are working best, how often they're being used, what people like about them and don't like about them, but they can't say, well, this particular company in Montana used this particular piece of information. Those tools become really compelling for the organizations that don't have their own marketing stacks and haven't necessarily had the skill set within their business to actually build that stuff up or take advantage of it.
That's what I
And
was
then
just
you get
thinking as you were
into
talking about it, because that's so common in the industrial manufacturing space that, um, channel partners in that space often they haven't invested in marketing automation. And so to get it by proxy through the vendor could be a huge value add.
Yeah, and it serves both purposes. It helps that partner to drive more revenue for themselves, and as a result of that, they become more loyal to the vendor,
Right.
and then the vendor starts to drive opportunity to the partner because they realize that they're loyal, and as a result of that, together they're much better than they would have been solo. And it's the way that a lot of partners are sort of growing, in that they get an attention of some manufacturer or vendor, and then they might have a sales manager or a person that manages that relationship, and the fewer of those people that the manufacturer manages, like the ratio, right, the
Hmm.
one to few or the one to many, when you get into that one to few category, then it starts to avalanche on itself, because they're more invested in you, and then they end up providing you with deals, and you're
Right.
providing them with deals, and the salespeople are quoted based on you, so they're always going to end up trying to drive revenue through your system.
So PRM, partner relationship management, is not the same as CRM, customer relationship management. But I think it's common that a company that uses a CRM effectively and understands how to do it may add custom objects around their sales channel as
Hmm.
kind of an initial foray into creating their own PRM. At what point, what's a tipping point when you see a company may try to manage channel that way, understanding that it doesn't do the partner marketing automation, it doesn't have the learning management system components and some of the other stuff. Um, but what's the transition point when suddenly they say, you know what, it's cumbersome, it's not as effective as we need. Let's look at PRM now.
Yeah. First things first, those CRMs should plug into your PRM, and if you're looking at a PRM that doesn't have the ability to plug your CRM into it, you're barking up the wrong tree. Okay. When you can combine that CRM with the PRM, it allows the bidirectional sync of those custom objects, and so you're able to leverage the data out of the CRM to be better in the PRM. And then the results of the PRM can be fed back into the CRM for reporting reasons and things
Okay.
like that. Um, the tipping point typically happens somewhere, and it depends on your business size, but it happens somewhere between 10 and 20 partners. And you'll know it's happened because you spend more and more of your time just supporting these motions that could be automated. And so for example, they start out by registering deals on an Excel spreadsheet. Well, what about when you can't keep track of them because they're coming faster than you really want to update that spreadsheet?
Right.
Or the second case, say you've got 20 partners, they all want co-branded assets that have their logo on it with your logo on it, and though they're not looking to change your messaging, they are looking to be represented in those documents.
Sure.
Who's going to do that? They don't have necessarily the tools to do it, so your marketing person ends up having to change all of those. Well, it's okay when they do that with one or two or three of them, but what if you're having to support 20 of them across
Right.
the board? Your entire life is just spent around something that can be completely and totally automated.
So it sounds like you're saying as long as you're aware that PRM exists, then you're going to suddenly realize when it's time to look at it.
Yeah.
If you
and
don't know it
it's
exists, then you might just keep trying to bowl through what you're doing, which would be a shame.
Yeah, and actually, the biggest challenge I think that happens here is that whether you're in industrial manufacturing or automotive or some of these other CPG, they all have partners, but no one realizes the technology exists.
Right.
Right, so they're building things from scratch that may or may not actually suit the real need, and it's simply because the PRMs themselves aren't using the same language because they were built originally to support the tech
Right.
space, which has its own nomenclature. um, they've expanded to be able to support all of the different industries, but they don't always know the language to use to help you realize that these platforms exist and you don't have to build them from
Right.
scratch.
And of course, building from scratch not only has the opportunity cost and the lead time and what you're paying somebody directly to do it, but then the support challenges and the security challenges. That person's on vacation or they leave for another job, or each end user is logging in from a different device, and you don't know if there's security there. So all of the kind of stuff that inherently comes with properly constructed software is important to keep in mind. It's not just a hobby project.
Yeah, and and the funny thing is, and we've even even in the tech space, you've got folks that they're like, well, we're a technology company, we should be able to do this. And by the time they get those solutions up and running, they're already
Right.
antiquated. Because the providers are doing things like they're bolting on AI, they're creating ways to manage your ecosystems, they're adding collaboration tools in, they're doing all of this other stuff that just they're seeing it across all of the industries and all of their clients, and so they're adding in all of these features that are going to make your life easier. Well, your programming team's going to go, we just finished.
Right.
And you're like, well, I could use this. No, we're done.
Right. Submit a
Yeah.
ticket.
Yeah.
Um, we've talked about how you can have these parallel channel structures. Will a PRM support those side by side? So if you have some distribution that owns the paper and you have some reps or agents that just work on commission, can you run both of those at the same time with a PRM?
Yeah, the the scalable ones you can. There are organizations that are kind of coming in right now, and they're saying, "Hey, we're a PRM," and they might deliver ice cream cones to partners, and they could because it's relationship related, they're calling themselves a PRM, but I mean, it's not as dopey as that. But the people that are growing their partner ecosystems or that are expanding on their partnerships quickly run out of headway with those types of platforms, and they realize, oh, I can't do everything that I actually needed or wanted to do. So you've got to really vet it out. But the platforms that have been around a while and that are built specifically with those things in mind, they have no problem managing the different partner types, the different go-to-market motions. They're able to, typically what they are is they're segmentation or persona driven, so that the experience of the vendor is different than the experience of the partner that does this one thing, which is different than the experience that the partner number two has
Sure.
that does this other thing. And as a result of that, it feels like it's entirely customized to the person that's using it, when really it's just kind of back end being managed through segmentation.
Understand. The common modules, I think you've touched on maybe all of them, certainly some of them: deal registration, co-marketing, uh, training, and learning and certifications, access to collateral. Those are four that come to mind. Probably not using the right terms. What are the important modules that really ought to be part of a PRM?
Yeah, when you look at the next generation PRM, not just the ones that do this thin slice, right? They have the PRM layer, which is the four things that you just mentioned. And then on top of that, they've got a set of partner marketing automation tools that allow you to do to partner. So when you need to notify partners of things going on in your program or with your inventory or whatever, there's a built-in way of announcing that to
Mm-hmm.
people. And then it also allows them to sell, and you to sell through partner, with partner, and for partner. So the people that really don't have any skill, they can still opt in and actually look like they're doing all this marketing, when really it's the vendor pulling the trigger from the back end. But so you end up with that PRM, and then the partner marketing automation, and then on top of that you end up with this channel management layer, and then you end up with an ecosystem layer, and then a set of services that kind of wrap around all of that. And honestly, it's almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It sort of stacks on top of each other as it goes up, and each one of them are sort of suited for the place that you are in that partnership journey, so that you don't have to take on everything until you're ready for it.
So visualizing is a stack. I want to talk about my dream for what might come on top of that stack. And backing up, one of the things I know in the industrial space is that often salespeople don't use CRM consistently. And so if we talk about them having to go to a PRM, which is a separate login to do certain functions, the likelihood that it's going to happen is relatively low in some cases. But I'm intrigued by the possibility of using a CDP, or a customer data platform, some kind of a data lake that would probably be maintained by the vendor, perhaps as part of the PRM, or tied in with it, that basically sits up there and syncs with the channel partner's CRM, potentially with the channel partner's marketing automation, with the vendor's CRM, vendor's marketing automation. Obviously there's rules that are built, there's rights and privileges, so that the channel partner is only sharing the parts that are relevant to the vendor. I get all that, but here's a vision I have, that in that CDP you would be able to see constellations of circumstances or events. So in other words, if I'm a channel partner working for a vendor, and a prospect that's with a deal that's registered by one of my channel partners comes and downloads the content or requests a quote, I'll share that information. It might happen automatically. It might happen by I get an email and then I reach out to them. But that's a fairly cumbersome process, and it also misses a lot of nuance. On the other hand, if we saw that three people from that same company with these job titles had engaged with this email from the channel partner, and visited this page on the channel partner's website, and looked at 3 pages related to the vendor on their site, and 2 people, including one from procurement from a target customer, has come to the vendor's site, and we see all of this stuff happening together. We don't just have these little bits of information, we can see the whole picture. And the problem is nobody has access to all of that. So we need a system, a way to aggregate all of that and have some rules and say, wait a minute, we're seeing this variety of things happening, which we think means that this is actually an active opportunity. And here's what we need to do. We need to get the channel partner the sales manager and the salesperson together to come up with a strategy to work on this. So long-winded background, but is that ever going to be possible? Is there merit to that?
It's closer than you think, actually. So it's funny with these PRMs. The goal is to make the content and the things in those PRMs available with the least amount of effort to the salespeople and the marketing people that have to work in them.
Can you get it right through your CRM?
Well, what you can do is you can set up things in the PRM that allow them to register that stuff and then bi-directionally sync it back to the CRM so that the guys aren't working through those kind of clunky environments, and that they're able to do the sales with less, or the recording of everything with less effort. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, as that happens, at least, what you're seeing in the partner marketing automation world is that you've seen these platforms like HubSpot and Pardot and some of these organizations that can tell you when someone's engaged with a piece of, like, an email that you sent. Right. Well, what the PRM or the partner marketing automation tools do is they take it a step further. They can see when the customer is doing that, but it's via the partner, right? So they can see when the partners sent things out, and then when the customers interacted with it. And as a result of that ability to unwind that attribution, you can do scoring, right? And when you start doing lead scoring at the account level, you can start to say, okay, well, 3 or 4 of these people from this organization have actually interacted with this common piece of collateral. Maybe someone should get a hold of them, and it shoots an email out notifying you that, that this event had occurred. Right. Now, it's not to the point where you're talking about, but it's a step in that direction. The other thing that we've started doing on the PRM side of things is emailed in deal registration. You can start to use AI to unwind those things, so that if you're a salesperson, you just email in the details. It's just part of the flow of your process. You email it in, and it automatically registers the deal for you and does those sorts of checks, so that you're never even having to get into the platform. The implication of that, when you tie that to the scoring side of things, is that the AI mixed with the ability to score starts to look closer and closer to the thing you're trying to solve through the data lake.
Understand. How about joint ticketing for aftermarket support issues? Is that ever done using a PRM to coordinate?
I haven't seen ticketing managed through the PRM, but what you do provide, and this idea with the PRM is to actually provide a single pane of glass, right? So that everyone just kind of goes to one place for everything that's related to the relationship. And one of the way that you would go about doing that is that we typically would see, when that happens, they would SSO that ticketing system into that same platform, so it exists in there. It looks like it's native to the process, but it's sitting on the portal, and it's because it's SSO'd in, then all of that is sort of integrated, though it's not.
Got it. Yeah. When PRM implementations fail, what's the most common reason?
That happens, and the reason is that people they do one of two things. They build a partner program and say, oh, because I've got a partner program, I need a PRM. And so they invest in the PRM too early. And, they're technology companies, so they're going to let you buy the thing, even if in the background they're kind of thinking, this might not be ideal for them. But so if it's too early, the second thing that they do is that they install it and forget it, and that's not going to work either. The most common time that those PRMs fail is because they set it and forget it, and then as a result of that, the content becomes stagnated. People go there less often. It's hard, it's not as relevant, and as a result of that, people sort of drop off, when really this whole thing is about engagement. The more engaged that your partners are with your platform, the more revenue you're going to get out of it. And so the ones that are really successful have someone focusing on the platform itself that's dedicated from their business to adding new content, setting things up, supporting the manufacturing organizations that are working across them, supporting the partners that are working across it, so that that experience is top notch. Again, back to the experience of the whole thing, and that experience drives engagement, and then the engagement drives the revenue.
That makes sense. Speaking of revenue, how does what's the sales model for this? Does a manufacturer buy a seat for each channel partner, for each rep? Do they expect channel partners to pay for their own seats? How does that typically done?
Yeah, it's usually purchased by the manufacturer, and then depending on who you work with. I mean, for our organization, we give away unlimited seats, right? So it's an unlimited user model, both with the manufacturer and for the partners that they're supporting, which makes it for us just way easier to kind of manage. You're not constantly having these conversations around how many licenses you have or don't have. You're not having to pay attention to all that, which makes you able to focus on the things that actually matter and make the whole thing sticky. Now that's not, I mean, we realize we're a little bit of a unique duck, and as a result of that, I mean, a lot of other organizations will do it at the partner licensing model. So the manufacturer pays for X number of partners to access it. Maybe it's 300, and you've got those 300 licenses. And if you hit the top end of that, then you have to buy more licenses.
I see. I'm thinking as you're talking, you kind of live in, I would call it maybe like a meta space. I mean, you're in charge of a partnership program to select and grow partners to help sell partner management software to companies that are working with partners. I mean, do you ever feel like you're caught in a hall of mirrors?
Yes. when I came into Mindmatrix, we talked a good game about partnerships and things like that, but we didn't have a full program built out. And so I spent much of the first year just building a program itself, and that meta relationship was not lost on me. The whole time I'm building this, going, I've done this before for technology companies, but this seems really strange. And then when you get into it, the partners themselves are very different than the ones that you would deal with in a tech world. And a lot of them are really cool consultants, and they're folks that just have these really good knowledge sets around, the guys like you that have really, really cool knowledge sets around a specific thing that they're good at. And that part of it's been really fun.
So you talked about the difference in West Coast culture of software, and how you're not backed by VCs, so you don't have some of that intense pressure. I'm sure, though, there's long hours and a lot of stress. I know you enjoy outdoor activities in the Southwest. I mean, what's your thing? How do you center your karma?
Yeah, I ride a very big motorcycle on dirt trails. I have a KTM 890 Adventure R.
Wow.
And if you've ever looked at that bike, it's about 400 pounds, and we ride it off road. There's a trail that runs from Mexico to Canada, and we try to ride that trail as often as we can and try to make it through as many sections of that as we can. And the measurement of success on those rides is not whether or not you got injured, it's how many times did you drop the bike on the ground. So you've got crash bars and stuff, and you're constantly just dropping it and lifting it and dropping it and lifting it.
Wow.
But you find that when you're thinking about, hey, don't drop the bike, I'm not thinking about what's going on with the channel.
Right.
you know, so,
Or when you're trying to stand that bike back up, you're cursing that, and you might start cursing the channel again too.
yeah, exactly.
I know your colleagues at Mindmatrix create a ton of content around partnership issues. Where do you go for business and marketing and sales insights? Are there blogs or YouTube channels or books or podcasts that you find helpful?
Yeah, I've got there are a few of these. The partnership leaders, if you've not heard of that, is quite good. I'd start by following them probably on LinkedIn. There are a number of groups. A lot of the ways that I get information on all of this is really from monitoring people in the channel spaces on LinkedIn, because they post a lot of really cool and interesting stuff about how they're managing their channels, or how they're sort of making the most of the things that they're
Mm-hmm.
doing. So I connect with a lot of channel people, just to really get a view towards how that's evolving. But there are a few really good groups. Partnership leaders is really quite good, particularly if you're kind of kicking these types of initiatives off. And the one podcast that I followed religiously is about to come to an end, so I'm gonna have to pick up a new one.
Which one was that?
It's the Nearbound podcast.
Got it.
They're the two guys that were running that are a couple of guys I know, and they found jobs within the vendor side instead of the agency side, so they're wrapping it up and kind of moving
Yeah, it
on.
was actually through Jared that you and I met.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a recurring theme that I hear from many guests that join me for these conversations, and that's about community. Does PRM offer modules to support community, something like Slack or Discord within the PRM?
Yeah, that part of it's been one of the emerging characteristics of these platforms, and it's because of ecosystem.
Okay,
Right,
so we're
back to
back to
that
where we started.
conversation around, yeah, the because you've got more people involved in the deal, you have to have an ability for them to interact with each other. And so they're building collaboration modules that are associated with really specific deals, or that allow people to kind of engage with each other on really specific topics. And then the other thing that they do is these platforms, you can API things into them. So you'll API Slack into it, or you'll API something else into it that allows them, if that's the preferred method of communication, you just go that route and get it API'd in.
Understand.
Yeah.
All right. So as we work toward wrapping up, I'll just call out. I'm a Mindmatrix partner, as Vaughn mentioned. I'm happy to chat with folks about how PRM could fit into your model now, or how you might evolve your channel model, or how PRM might be appropriate in the future. Feel free to reach out to me, but also feel free to reach out to Vaughn. So Vaughn, what's the best way for people that want to contact you? How do they catch up with you?
I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. I accept connections with just if it doesn't look like they're selling to me. I'm open to connecting with just about anyone. My email, von.mordecai@mindmatrix.net. Frankly, Ed's amazing. You've probably figured this out as listeners, but he's an amazing guy, and and he knows his stuff. So going that route is just as good as anything.
Well, you're making me blush. Thank you for the
That's
kind
pretty hard
words.
to do.
All right, so kind of high level, looking out 5 years, understanding what you do about business and the way people are going to market. What's your kind of the biggest concern, and you think the biggest opportunity?
Well, I think they're both the same thing. I think it has to do with AI. AI is moving the needle within technology companies so fast right now that when you listen to most organizations talk about AI, and if you're a late adopter, you really need to pay attention to this, but the it's moving faster than people realize, and it's a problem for folks that don't understand it to keep up. And even for those that do understand it, it's evolving so quickly that it's having an impact on just about everything they do. So a lot of the budgets are being diverted to AI initiatives. They're building out private AI systems. The AI itself is, that they've got in these private systems are learning so quickly. And even so, I've got this other partner that I work with called Achieve Unite, and they do things that are very different than what you do, Ed. But they're in the training space around partnerships, and they have built an AI that if you've got questions about partnerships or communication or trust or all of these different concepts, their AI can answer it based on all of the papers they've written and the research that they've done. And it's got this stack of stuff that kind of sits behind it that allows people in line to actually just say, I've got this question, how am I supposed to deal with these incentives? And it's got an answer for
Right.
it. Well, if you see it happening in that channel, you've got to imagine that, the Googles and the Microsofts they're so accelerated to that. And it's when you go to these conferences and listen to people talk about it, they're saying that the impact of AI is going to be equal to when the internet was introduced. And I haven't ever heard anyone say that about any product that I've been involved with in the entire time I've been in tech since the internet kind of came out.
There's certainly a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of people hyperventilating about it. We'll have to see how it all shakes out. This has been fabulous. Thank you very much. For everyone listening, do your part. Help me get the word out about this podcast. Please like it, share it, comment, and subscribe. And Vaughn, I guess one last simple question for you. Take years of insight and an hour of conversation and kind of give us 2 to 3 minutes, a final word on partnerships and PRM and go to market.
Yeah, focus on engagement. Focus on the partners that are engaged with you, and that doesn't mean that you have to have that you're the only partner on their line card, but you do need to be one that they're paying attention to and that you're supporting in a way that's mutually beneficial, because partnerships have an inherent they're inherently better when there's a level of trust between them.
It's like any
And
relationship.
yeah, it is. And the funny thing about it is that they're better together. It's a relationship. And people like to work with people that they like. Right. And so if you've got a relationship with a customer and you've got a great relationship with a vendor or a manufacturer, that relationship is better. It's more fun. You enjoy it more. And who doesn't want that?
And so then guess where you're going to spend your time and put your energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Perfect.
Right.
Thank you so much for your insights and for your time, Vaughn.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure being on this podcast. Thank you.
And appreciate everyone listening. Have a good day.